Up until its release, I was cautiously optimistic about Returnal. The developer Housemarque has a proven track record of fantastic arcade twin-stick games like Resogun on PS4. The idea of a AAA release from them excited me, but seeing them push for a third-person shooter roguelike had me a bit anxious. Ultimately, I'm happy to report that in true Housemarque fashion, Returnal is one great arcade-like game, albeit with one major caveat. But before we dive into it, make sure you click that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and maybe leave a comment down below. As you know, viewer engagement helps the review come up in YouTube search, and I greatly appreciate your help. Now without further ado, let's start this review starting with its story. The drive behind Returnal's gameplay loop is its riveting sci-fi mystery. For those purposes, I don't want to dive too deep into specifics regarding the story, so forgive me if it's a bit shallow. Returnal has you play as astronaut Celine, who performs an emergency landing on the planet Astropos. This mysterious planet evoked this white shadow signal that alerts Celine's curiosity despite her company Astra's better judgment. Now stranded on this alien planet, Celine wanders across the different biomes as she tries to locate the origin of this white shadow signal. Sometime along the way, she discovers that when she dies, she comes back to the moment her ship crash landed on the planet in the first place. Now trapped in this time loop, Celine continues her seemingly endless search for this mysterious signal in hopes of freeing herself from the time loop. As a premise for a roguelike gameplay loop, I thought it was a fantastic idea for a backstory that not only gives the roguelike gameplay relevance, but also crafts together a truly fascinating story. With every death, you see a flash of imagery that occasionally gives you some added context to what's happening to Celine. It's not necessarily on par with something like Hades, who set a standard for gradual storytelling even during runs that resulted in you dying. With that said, it does a decent job at sprinkling in new story elements throughout the game, and part of that is with the audio logs, which I think is arguably the best form of collectibles out there. The last thing I want to do is collect 20 text documents and then read them at the end of the mission without the full context. The occasional audio log that details more story information without interrupting the gameplay was a great narrative device that I wish more games took advantage of. Returnal is a third-person action shooter roguelike that feels exactly how I'd expect a Housemarque game to feel. That's to say that this is all fast-paced arcade action as opposed to the heavier slow-paced combat in something like The Last of Us, or more tactile cover shooter combat like in Gears. In many ways, mobility is what defines the gameplay loop for me. The gameplay is fast-paced, quick action, and equally nimble in combat. Celine is able to fire her gun and jump as an early basis for her mechanics. She runs from room to room, taking out enemies and progressing toward the objective marker on her radar. These rooms are randomly generated and their placement changes completely with every new run throughout the game. However, as she progresses deeper into the planet, she comes across both permanent and temporary upgrades. Permanent upgrades like the very early unlocked dash and sword flesh out Celine's arsenal of skills that not only open up her combat, but also how she traverses the world. The dash allows her to quickly dip out of fire while also leaping across faraway platforms. Her sword, on the other hand, can quickly get rid of lower leveled enemies while also acting like a Metroidvania tool, unlocking previously guarded off areas during the start of the game. That's not the only Metroid influence in Returnal. In fact, a lot of the atmosphere here is reminiscent of multiple media projects both in film and video games. Immediately walking through this mysterious planet, I felt the eerie atmosphere from both Metroid, Aliens, and even the film Annihilation. It's creepy, mysterious, yet equally inviting and approachable. I immediately fell in love with this world design that, despite being randomly generated, never became dull to me. The temporary upgrades come in the form of parasites that both give you a buff and a nerf. These made playthroughs a bit more entertaining as I found the game of trying to strike a balance between parasites to be fun. Add on to that the search for better weapons which aren't necessarily tied to how far you are into a run, adrenaline boost for taking on enemies, and so on. Returnal just felt continuously rewarding for every successful run. Well, maybe not all the time, because there is one glaring issue with Returnal, one major oversight that just doesn't make any sense. You can't save in this game. So if you're playing 2 hours into a run and you want to take a break, your only options are to put the PS5 in rest mode or leave the console on. If your game auto updates for a patch, you lose your progress. If the game crashes, which some players have reported on, you lose your progress. This is a game from 2021, and this is a game from 1986. Guess which one lets you save? Returnal is such an interesting case when it comes to visuals. Being a PlayStation second-party game, I think it's fair to assume that Sony would try their best to make this a visual showcase, and in some ways it is. There's an absurd amount of particle effects left and right, and the destructible debris consistently is on screen. In fact, that's sort of the staple for the studio to the point that it's been the selling point for the PS4's performance too with Resogun. Now on PS5, Returnal does the same thing, but now with the camera behind the player as opposed to over the player. It's truly impressive looking, but diving into the details, you might be shocked to hear that Returnal is running at a target of 1080p 60. This is of course on the new Sony console being advertised as a 4K 60 machine. While Returnal does run at a native 1080p, it upscales the gameplay to a native 4K in the same way that PS4 did for later games like Horizon Zero Dawn. The end result is something that definitely looks better than native 1080p, but it's also hard to distinguish the checkerboard 4K when all the particle effects are on screen. The 60 frames per second target is realistically more like a 50 to 60 frames per second target. A lot of this is because of how the game tends to use the hardware. For example, the ray tracing system built into the PS5 isn't being used for in-game reflections, but rather the 3D audio system. Even with the less than expected performance out of Returnal, it's a beautiful looking game. The cinematic cutscenes do a phenomenal job at both equally confusing me, as much as it does answer more questions regarding the Returnal mystery. During traditional gameplay, you can always expect a fireworks show of particle effects to amaze you. It truly does feel like a classic bullet hell game, but modernized to be a third-person shooter. It's simply mesmerizing, and despite the lower native resolution, nothing is lost with the title's presentation. Returnal creates this eerie atmosphere that's frightful as much as it is beautiful. Walking through this distraught world, I was amazed by how much world building was done solely on the audio side. I often found myself slowly walking and closing my eyes, trying to hear the 3D audio in full effect as I could feel the world's raindrops through my DualSense. Returnal also happens to be one of the few games that truly does make use of the DualSense haptic feedback. While it's not on the level of Astrobot, I love the use of the controller in Returnal. During the game's opening, I could feel the raindrops land on my character's suit. During combat, I could feel the trigger lock midway, differentiating between a regular gunfire and a more powerful alternate fire. Clever uses like this alongside the 3D audio only heighten my senses of the world around me, truly captivating me and engulfing me in this alien world. Returnal is a strong contender for one of the better releases on PlayStation 5. I've been adamant about how little I use my PS5 since I got it because most of my third-party games tend to play better on PC and Series X, and outside of the DualSense, there isn't much of a reason for me to use my PS5 when knowing that the games I get on my Xbox will always work on my Xbox now and in the future. I can't really say that about Sony, especially with the whole track record on Vita and PS3. Nevertheless, Returnal proves me wrong in the best ways, finally giving me a reason to keep coming back to my PS5 even after I finish the game, and that's the biggest praise I can give Returnal. Outside of its major flaw with saves and performance dips, it's one of my favorite games of 2021 thus far. Thank you so much for watching my review. If you liked the video, then let me know with a thumbs up and a comment down below. Are you going to pick up Returnal? And if not, how come? I'd love to know why in the comments down below. Anyway, I gotta get back to playing Skate City on my Nintendo Switch. That'll be the next review you see from me on here. But until then, I'll talk to you in the comments down below or over on my Discord server. You can join with the link in the description.